busy, aren't we?
Busy, yeah,
Kathy's
Kathy. That's
here.
not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing at all. Not a bad thing. So we're going to go ahead and kick it off this morning. As always, I anticipate some people will trickle right in, but I want to be very respectful of the fact that you're here on time and go ahead and get kicked off. So I'm going to start by reviewing some of the upcoming events, and then we'll kick into a few other topics for today. So just a reminder that after the team meeting at 12:15, the ALC meeting will take place right here. And then from 1 to 3, Lisa is doing some of her coaching right here in the training room as well. There's a regional event this Wednesday and Thursday. It's Career Visioning. It's a pretty good course. It's actually pretty phenomenal. If you want a last-minute ticket to it, if it's still available, we can maybe work with you. It's 9 to 5. Takes place up in the cities. Career Visioning is kind of about hiring people and what that process looks like. There's a new forms class this Thursday from 12 to 1. Lunch will be provided, so that might be a good one to attend. I'm going to cover the purchase agreement again today, but there'll be some additional forms that are covered at that one.
Is that you or Kelly?
I believe that's Kelly on Thursday. Yep. So even more reason to be there. I'm not teaching it.
Well, don't get both perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely. Next Monday, the CGI call again takes place. That's every Monday. That's from 1 to 2 here in the training room. And then coaching with Lisa next Tuesday as well from 1 to 3 here in Rochester. Next Wednesday, I'm teaching a class on how to win in multiples from 12 to 1. That'll be here. And that will kind of take us to the end of the month and then into September. Any questions on that?
What is that CGI call?
So the CGI call is part of the Career Growth Initiative. So the CEO of Keller Williams, his name is John Davis, and he used what we call the Growth Initiative to push the growth of Keller Williams over the last few years. So basically taking that, the models, the systems, everything he used to drive the growth of Keller Williams as a company, and they've tweaked it and modified it so that agents can use some of the same systems, models, and tools to grow their careers or grow their real estate businesses. So we've got the Growth Initiative that the company did, and now they've taken that and converted it into what we're calling the Career Growth Initiative, or the CGI. So every Monday, it's either John or somebody else that's on the phone call, and their focus is helping you grow your business. Every Friday, I have a phone call from 11:30 to 12:30 with John or somebody that John has put in touch or put in charge of the call, and the call is focused on the Growth Initiative, on how we grow our market centers and our agents' businesses and continue to add value. So the phone calls that I'm on are absolutely phenomenal. So if you've got the time and you can set it aside from 12 to 1 Mondays, there's some really good phone calls that will help you grow your business. So sorry, that was a long answer to your question, but it's pretty phenomenal stuff. Any other things that aren't on the calendar that we should be aware of in the near future that I didn't bring up? Anything happening locally? Okay, sounds good. So before we dive into some of today's content, what I'd like to do is get in the habit of taking the first few minutes of each team meeting to jot down a few things that we're grateful for, kind of having a moment of gratitude before we jump into the team meeting stuff. And normally it's something that I sometimes don't give as much attention to because I like to just dive into the content. But I think recent events have reminded us how important it is to sometimes stop and remember what it is we're grateful for. So just take a minute or two on a piece of paper. If you don't have a piece of paper, maybe you can borrow one for a neighbor. Just jot down maybe 3 to 5 things that you're really grateful for this morning. So I'll give you guys a minute to do that. Looks like Jim's going to become the paper donator here.
Thank you. Sure.
It's a beautiful pen you have there, Jim.
What's that?
Beautiful pen you have.
Isn't it beautiful?
Does it have glitter in it?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
what
I live for it.
You should go sit over on that side, poor Tana's all by herself.
She's like, I prefer this. So Leanne, right now what we're doing is we're just taking a minute, writing down a few things that we're grateful for. All right, well, thank you for indulging me in that. Does anybody want to share one or two things that they're grateful for? Yes, ma'am.
I am grateful, and every day I give thanks for so many things, but as I'm sitting up on the lake, Cass Lake, and enjoying a beautiful day, Minnesota, everything, I really do give great thanks, and so thankful for Keller Williams for really understanding that, you know, my business objective, Life by Design, and to have looking out at the lake and think this is the perfect sign. I love what Keller Williams has instilled in me, has taught me to believe in myself, to believe that my success is contingent only upon myself. But if I do it the right way, follow the example of Keller Williams, I can take, like Jason says, a vacation every month.
There you go. Well, thank you for sharing. Very appropriate. You're wearing your bold purple today, so.
Yes, I did that on purpose.
Absolutely. Anybody else? Yes.
I am most thankful that my granddaughter's heart surgery went well.
Absolutely.
And I'm thankful for Keller Williams too, and that I can be busy for a while and then I can be unbusy and help her because they need help.
She's a little cutie.
Yeah, and just thankful for health.
Good. Good. Health was number 2 on my list.
Yeah, it's a big
Thankful
thing.
for health.
It's a really big thing, yes.
Anybody else want to share? Mr. Jim?
I think I'm grateful for all the help we had with June's funeral, what you did too,
Well, thank you.
financially, and all the people that contributed.
Absolutely.
It's really cool.
Yeah, we were able to raise quite a lot of money. So there were quite a few donations that came in outside of the GoFundMe page as well. So family was well taken care of, large part thanks to everybody in this room. So much appreciated. A couple things I'm grateful for: my family and for my health, and I'm very grateful for the summer weather. Although it feels more like fall. I don't know what's going on with August this year. It does not feel like August.
I know, it's really weird.
It's like a mixture of April and sometimes September, like late September. But anyway, it's
okay.
beautiful and it's sunny, so that's a good thing. Thank you for indulging me in that. Another thing we're going to start is we're going to put a little jar at the front desk so that anytime you want to give somebody a shout out or thank them, you can write it down and then put it in the jar, and then we'll share it at team meetings. So we don't have the jar out there yet, but it'll be out there soon. And to get things started, I'm going to give a few shout outs, and I'm going to kind of steal a little bit of what Jim did. I'm going to give a shout out to both Nikki and Katie for covering down and filling all the gaps that need to be filled. Lord knows there's a lot of them, right? They've both stepped up in a big way. We hired Nikki full time, so she's going to be here Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, holding down the fort, picking up some of the additional slack that needs to be picked up, and then Katie and Mel as well. Big thanks to Jim for helping to take care of the food at the funeral and some of the coordination that took place, and a big thanks to everybody in this room and everybody in our office for coming together to help out June's family during that time. So that takes care of the shout outs. Anybody else want to give any shout outs?
Can I add to the
Yeah.
stuff? Nikki and I were talking about Christmas
Mm-hmm.
and sponsoring the kids.
Oh, it's a
Our
very good.
office would be interested in sponsoring the kids because June provided a lot at Christmas. for
Sure.
her grandchildren.
I'll put that in the back of my head, and then come close to Christmas time, it sounds like a great idea. Very cool. Anything else?
I just have a work thing. I
Sure.
looked last night at the trust funds, and those are so easy.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't used them, I haven't had to use them or anything, but I thought I would go ahead in there and look at it. Wow.
Cool.
And what a time saver.
Really,
We're not having to take checks
Really?
anywhere and,
yeah, and very, very easy.
Absolutely. Well, very good. So, again, thanks for that. What I'd like to do now is shift gears pretty dramatically and talk about some forms. I know it's super, super exciting. But if you remember, toward the beginning of the month and toward the end of last month, we spent a lot of time talking about the new form, specifically the new purchase agreement that was going to be coming out. And now that you've all had a chance to start hopefully working with it or seeing it, I'm curious, what questions do you have? What issues are you running into? Are you still having other agents submitting offers that are on old forms and things of that nature? Then we're going to kind of work through it again just one more time to refresh your memories. So any thoughts or feedback on the form specifically? Yes, ma'am.
The first purchase agreement I received on this form, it really messed with my mind because I wasn't paying attention. And I'm looking, it's like, how can this agent forget the inspection and the financing and all of this?
Sure.
And then you go back and realize it's all on one form. And how awesome is that? I mean, it's all right there. It's all right there.
This is like the first time,
Simplicity.
yeah, the first time I've seen them make changes to forms where people are like, this is a phenomenal change.
Yeah.
I love it.
you know, my first thought was like 12 pound, 4 pages got added to this.
Right.
Then it was like, oh, and we eliminated more than that.
Right.
Yay.
So in looking at page 1, not much change aside from the fact that when you get toward the bottom, let me scroll down on here. When you get toward the bottom, it asks some questions about what % will be assumed and what % might be contract for deed, etc. So usually, most of us are only having to use lines 1 and 2. So just keep that in mind. Sometimes, and the one drawback I think of this form is when sections that aren't used or left blank, I think that throws us off a little bit. And it throws off our clients. We kind of feel like, ooh, there's a number and a blank there. I feel like something should maybe need to go there or something. Or sometimes your clients will kick it back if you're doing it electronically and say, hey, I noticed there's a blank on this line and this line. You know, you have to tell them, well, that's fine. That's actually supposed to be that way. So one good practice or habit that I've gotten into or that some agents do are they might use, so for example, when you're looking at numbers 1 and 2, you might put in 5% 95, and then for 3 and 4, you might just put NA or put a line through it. Just so,
0.
Or 0, absolutely, or just put 0, just so that people know, or an X, whatever you prefer. Closing date, that's still the same. We move on to page 2, because this is where some of the bigger changes have occurred. I mean, it's kind of nice. They're really the same documents embedded in the purchase agreement, but it can throw you off. Again, whether or not there's a mortgage, if it's contingent upon financing, first mortgage, conventional, identifying what sort of financing you're utilizing. Okay. Again, we're putting in the term of the loan as well as the interest rate or range or whatever you prefer to do there. This section hasn't really changed. It still has the same implications, whether or not you check either one of those boxes. Yeah. Then we move on. Hello there. How are you? No worries. We move on to page 3. Again, it talks about locking in the interest rate. That's really not too much of a change. Work orders, and then if you get to line 127, it talks about the FHA escape clause. Okay, so I think it's important here. For example, if you're going to use FHA, or excuse me, if you use conventional financing or anything other than FHA, what I would get in the habit of doing is if this portion of the purchase agreement does not apply to your transaction, I would just put a huge X through it. That's me personally. I'm not telling you to do that, but the reason I do that is what I don't want, because here's what your client will do. Your client's going to read everything, some of them, right? They're going to read something about an escape clause, and even though they're using conventional financing, they might think that, oh, I've got an escape clause, it's in my contract. Well, no, that doesn't apply to the type of financing you're using. So what I do is, or what I would suggest you do, just put a big X through it and say, hey, this portion of the purchase agreement does not apply to you because you're using conventional financing, so I'm just putting an X through it to make sure that everything is understood and crystal clear. Does that make sense?
You're going to write on the purchase agreement, then doesn't everybody have to initial it?
Now, if you just X through stuff. If you're going to change or you're adding terms or changing terms, then people do have to initial next to it. Lender processing fees. Again, it says FHA, DVA financing only. So if someone's using conventional, it might not even apply. So you either cross it out or put an X or line through there, right? Because have we seen a huge uptick in conventional financing? Absolutely. Right? In order to be competitive, you're finding people that are using conventional way more than what was used in the past. So a lot of language in here might not even apply to their financing. So let's make sure it's crystal clear.
Could you also on that 132 just write a NA or not F?
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. So looking on page 4, DVA. Okay, again, if we're not even using VA financing, you know, the fact that that's in here could be a little confusing. So just a big X through it. Unless you're going to utilize it, then you would fill it out how you normally would on a VA financing addendum. Seller's contributions to buyer's closing costs. Again, we all recognize that from the previous addendum. It's still filled out the same exact way. So just make sure that you don't miss that because we're used to it being on a separate form. I've seen it being missed sometimes on the actual purchase agreement. So make sure that you identify what we're going to do in terms of closing costs, if anything. Inspection, again, this is the same as the current inspection or the previous inspection addendum. The language is just embedded in here. Make sure you don't miss it. Some language that I suggest you consider adding potentially on line 194 is that if the buyer and the seller fail to reach an agreement within the timeline found on line blank, that the inspection is automatically canceled and earnest money refunded to the buyer. Because if we don't add that language, what does the inspection timeline say if the timeline runs out?
Repeat again what you said tonight.
Yeah, something to the effect of if the buyer and seller agree to reach, or excuse me, fail to reach an agreement regarding the inspection contingency by the timeline indicated on line, looks like it's line 184, then this purchase agreement to be automatically canceled. Both parties will sign a cancellation, earnest money refunded to the buyer.
Versus if they don't, then everything moves forward.
Right, because right now, do you remember about a year or two ago, there was a huge change to the inspection addendum? And that big change was what?
2 days, 3 days, 2 days.
Right, and the language that Michelle just mentioned. They
just
changed
said the sale
it.
goes
Yeah,
forward.
they basically said, hey, if there's no cancellation, the buyer, you're committed to purchasing the property. Previously, what used to be the case?
I think it's still the case. I
It-
think it did, because I think when all of your timelines ran out, if nothing happened, it just
It
ended.
just dropped off and you move forward.
They go forward.
So
That was what the last one.
Well, it was a while ago. It used to be if you didn't reach an agreement, it was
But you
done.
only had, you had this many days to.
You still had a
say your
timeline,
buyer.
absolutely.
Right, and then seller had this many days to respond, blah, blah, blah. But if you didn't do anything within that time frame, if absolutely nothing happened, it moved to pending. Your time ran out.
Does anybody remember it differently?
I do.
Yeah, and I think
It was
Yeah.
a long time ago.
it was a
How
while
long
ago, and we've seen different forms. I'm not gonna re-debate that past thing, but
The
what,
bottom line is now.
Right.
It still moves forward. So nothing has changed there. You're just saying that,
I'm saying protect your buyers potentially by
Yeah.
saying, hey, if we fail to reach an agreement and I don't get that cancellation in time,
that makes
then
sense.
it is automatically
Yeah.
canceled. Otherwise, your buyer gets potentially locked into an agreement. So, yes, sir.
That's the topic of today's hot dish.
Oh,
If anybody reads it,
What's it say?
it's about inspections, timeliness, and a lot of comments in there about don't wait until the last minute to send over an addendum
Mhm.
because they might not get it till the next morning, and then the seller will say, well, I didn't get it, so I'm.
Right, so you're locked in.
They
So you're
should
locked in.
You don't wait until the last 10 minutes to 12, the
And
last
That's
day.
the accountability.
Yeah.
It's no accountability. I mean, that's not fair. That's what I run into all the time too, from the seller's end, is they get that inspection done on the 9th day.
Right.
And I like it better when they had, everybody was accountable for X number of days.
Well, and I also think, if we're leading forward and we're coming close to that inspection timeline running out, what's another thing we can,
Extend it.
yeah, we can just,
I
let's
do
just
that
communicate with the
every
other
morning.
agent and say, hey, maybe it makes sense for us to do an amendment that extends our inspection contingency timeline for an additional 3 to 5 days, right? But get it in writing. Don't just ever agree to that via phone or email. Get that in writing. It's very easy to do. Just make sure you're in communication with the other agent and get it signed off on. That's a pretty reasonable thing.
Just updated form is in the transaction.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely.
While we're talking about this was a topic in the last couple of days. I had an agent that challenged me on this. I want your input,
First off, who was the other agent?
not in our office.
Okay, very good. Before you trap me there.
Yeah, not a different company. We're talking about when you start counting
The days?
Final acceptance is day 0.
Oh,
The next
correct.
day
Is
is
day
day
one.
1.
Yes.
Is that correct? What is your input on that?
I don't know, what do you guys think, right?
I suppose.
It says right
Oh, I
there,
don't know.
the day after the occurrence.
Because it could happen at 8 in the morning, or it could happen at midnight, so you're not gonna count that day.
Okay, so I just want your input, because that's how I've always operated, but she was challenging me on how many days we had. She counts final acceptance as day one.
When in doubt, you can always do an extension if there's any ambiguity between the two of you.
Well, what I know, but it brought up a conversation, and even there's 2 agents in our office in Austin
Yeah.
that count final acceptance as day one.
Okay, well
And
then
I'm
it
like-
sounds like we need to look into that some more and maybe
Something that we
shoot some
start,
information out.
at least within our office.
Yeah, I think that would be something
So
that
we
we
can
could.
go back to people and say, Zach says.
Right.
Zach
See?
says."
And the other thing is
That's
you
how it
can always,
starts.
always email Michelle Smith.
Well, maybe that would be
Good
something
question.
that I can do, because I've always done that, and I thought, well, I'm gonna go read the purchase agreement. And right there in calendar
Talking about
days,
the inspection.
but on page 9 or 8, whatever it is now, right above the default area, in the purchase agreement, it says,
This is what it says.
Yeah.
All inspections, tests, and resulting negotiations, if any, shall be done within blank calendar days of final acceptance date of the
So it was the
Okay.
next day would be day one.
so then you
Doesn't
go,
clarify that.
get out of the
It does,
inspection.
here's what I'll say.
Within how many days, calendar days of the final acceptance
Right.
date? Well, the final acceptance date is today, within how many calendar days,
Right.
the next day would be day.
I would say if I put on a very objective hat, that there's probably some gray area there. We should probably say, date of final acceptance is day 0, just to give clarity. But I could see how it could be interpreted.
Well, you're not saying the final acceptance day is day 0,
Right.
but within the one day would be
Right.
the next day.
Right,
of the
but then
final
the
acceptance.
question remains, so.
Have
do
you said
count
within
that?
1 day, if you actually filled that in as 1 day,
It's,
within 1 day of
It would
final
be the
acceptance,
next
it would
day.
not be the same day as final
no, it
acceptance.
would be the next
I'm
day.
not saying I disagree with you, I'm saying I could see why there might be some misinterpretation of that, so,
I'm
thanks for
just
raising
curious,
that. Oh, that's good. Anyway, any other questions or any other feedback on, that added verbiage potentially? It's good standard practice to get into, because also worst case scenario, if you somehow miss that timeline, well, instead of being locked in, you can cancel and renegotiate, right? Something to think about. Okay, sale of a buyer's property. Let's talk a little bit about this, and then let's have a general discussion about it too. So right now, if you're making an offer in today's market and you represent the buyer and it's contingent upon the sale of their property, how are those offers being treated?
What do you mean?
Kind of like they're meaningless almost,
They're
right?
not quite as, they're not as
It all
good.
depends on the come
Right,
in.
I'll give you some caveats and such.
Depends on the offer.
Right, but right now, in today's market, especially if you're entering into multiples, or the listings they're making an offer on is pretty new to the market, making offers contingent upon the sale of the property, they're not being treated as attractively as offers,
Because-
for obvious reasons. That's usually always the case, but even in this market, even now, they're a little bit less attractive. Now, that being said, if you're at price points that are a little bit higher, where there's less demand and less competition, you might be okay, right? And as a listing agent, why do listing agents sometimes not like the fact, or why might they not entertain an offer that's contingent upon the sale of another, even if it technically will net the buyers, the sellers, a little bit more? Why are they, and sometimes the sellers, not as excited about that?
Because it's not a sure thing.
It's not a sure thing. The timeline is
timeline,
sometimes
yeah.
unknown, and it's
You can
less of
look
a
up
sure
what the
bet.
property is
Right, absolutely.
and how the.
If it's already listed.
Price, right.
It might not even be listed yet, right? So I think some discussions need to be had. Let's just get strategic really quick for a minute, right? Because how many of you know somebody out there, or you've run into a situation where you've met somebody who would sell their property because they want to buy, but they say, you know what, I'm just not comfortable putting this one on the market yet and getting an offer on it, because then I might be homeless before I find my next home. How many of you guys have run into that? It happens all the time, right? But one of the discussions that we can be having, especially in this market right now with those sellers, is you can say this: here's the deal. If your property is very, very attractive, and we know it's attractive, and we know it's going to be competitive for your home, you can make your sale contingent upon you finding your next property, right? All of a sudden, that can take the uneasiness out of the equation that they have. If your only concern is finding your next property, well, great. we'll communicate it to the buyers that when they're submitting offers on your home, that offer and the sale will be contingent upon you finding your next property. You just eliminated that objection, right? Now, we can have some comfort and confidence selling your property now and then going out and finding your next one or having time to find the next one before you find yourself in that situation where you're in limbo, right? And the reason why you can do it in this market is why? Yeah, because the buyers are willing to do almost anything to be competitive and get that property, right? So don't let that necessarily be a sticking point for you or your client. Not saying that you should force them to or really sell them on that, but I think that sometimes we forget to educate them about that option, that we have that availability to us. That's fine. You can sell all day long contingent upon you finding your next property. Yes, that's best case scenario for you. Now you can say again.
Yeah, you can make a contingent on successful closing of that property.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
Well, my last 3 listings have all been contingent and on property sale. And when you look at it, I mean, and that's how I'm learning them. You don't have that much to lose on, like from the buyer's side. I probably wouldn't look at a contingent offer the first week, but if it doesn't sell within the first week, and I feel like today's round of buyers aren't as eager to jump on things the first week. They don't want to get into that. They're willing to sit back and wait a week to see what happens. But a contingent offer, I think that's how real estate is moving forward because of our shortage and because of the guarantee that we need to make to the sellers. Yeah, they don't want to sell their home because they don't want to be homeless. So it is learning the contingencies and how it's really maybe that's moving forward what we're going to see a whole lot more of.
Well, that's one of the top reasons why people aren't selling, even though they can get top dollar for their property right now, because they know that once they sell, they might be in the same boat that a lot of buyers are in, which is competing very, very fiercely for their next home. But I think having that option, educating them about that option, can give you a little bit more flexibility. You can afford them some flexibility and some confidence in getting it done. And I'm speaking from an example that comes to mind recently, where there were some clients, they wanted to make an offer on a property, but they had a home to sell, so they went in, they had been educated, hey, highly recommend you sell your property first or get it under contract, because any offer you make, it's not going to be as competitive or attractive. It's going to have that contingency in place. Lo and behold, they found one, offered, didn't get it, even though they net the seller more, they didn't get it because they didn't like that contingency. And then what do? They get mad. Sometimes they feel like, well, why didn't you tell us about that? Or they, well, we did, we reminded you about it, blah, blah, blah. And then now all of a sudden that they've lost out on a property, they see that what you've been telling them is true and accurate. Now they might be more willing to, okay, let's get it listed and we'll accept offers contingent upon us finding our next one. I think understanding that process and communicating it clearly is going to be very, very crucial in these kind of markets moving forward, where they're hyper competitive and have people that are on the fence about selling their property.
I have a question.
Yes.
For those of you who have sold new properties, do you?
Like new construction?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you forego the inspection contingency sometimes, or, I mean?
The inspection
During a fall,
contingency, first off, it depends upon kind of which PA the builder wants to use, right? Because there's a new construction PA, but sometimes if it's a spec home or a home that's already been built, you might use a traditional purchase agreement. So I've helped people buy new construction properties, and I always recommend to have a home inspection, but whether or not they choose to is up to them. Very often they choose not to. So let me give you
another 1 year's warranty too on new construction.
And sometimes even longer on certain things, right? So here's my school of thought on it.
And you can assume everything was permitted, or how do you? Well,
here's my school of thought. If it's a new construction home, in the sense that Jim is the builder, I brought the clients to Jim and we built it from the ground up, meaning we dug foundation, we had drywall meetings, electric, all those meetings, and the walkthrough and stuff. I'm probably a little bit more comfortable with it not having inspection in that case. But if it's a spec home that's already built, to me that's just like any other home. And having going through the process of building a home myself, I can tell you there's tons of issues along the way. Tons of issues. We're building a home right now, and before it's done, we found mold in the basement. I mean, how does that even happen? Right? Somebody didn't plug in the sump pump one day, rainstorm, got water in the basement of a new construction home. It's like, are you kidding me? Right? So that's why I always say, you never know. Always err on having an inspection, in my humble
They
opinion.
forget to put insulation in the attic.
Right, well, and
That's one thing that inspectors
How-
like often.
well, here's the added benefit to having that inspection before you close on a new construction home. If you find stuff, guess what? The builder pretty much has to fix it, right? So long as it's reasonable. Here's another good strategy. So you have that year warranty. Well, what some of our clients do is before that year comes up, they'll have an inspector come out. They'll inspect the home before that year deadline, and they'll take the list of stuff to the builder and say, these are the items that the inspector identified as issues.
Why wouldn't you just do that right away?
Well, because.
Because things can, here's what can happen. So things can change over the year. And in Minnesota, we have all 4 seasons and they're fierce, right? So you might move in the home or have it inspected during the spring or summer, but a lot can change in the home when it experiences all 4 seasons within our state. So by the time you re-inspect it a year later, you might uncover some new things and just home settle and do goofy
Is
things
it
over
harder
time.
to get the builder to fix things?
Depends on the builder.
Because they have.
Depends on the builder.
Yeah.
We've got a home listed right now, and I was in the basement, and what we thought was a trim issue because there was a gap between the carpeting and the trim. Like, oh, it's just shoddy work, right? Well, come to find out, the concrete slab was sinking in that corner because during the building phase, when they pushed in the backfill, it was the winter time and a lot of the dirt was frozen. Big issue, right? So the builder was contacted. This is like, 2 or 3 years after the home was built and closed. Builder's coming back out because that foundation is warranted for how long?
10 years.
10 years. And guess what? They're jacking up that concrete slab at the cost of the builder, right? But not all builders might respond that timely and just, it depends on who the builder is. But in theory, they're supposed to cover a lot of that stuff. So my general rule of thumb is, and I know it sounds kind of stupid in some cases, but I say, hey, have that inspection.
Is that the
Have the
builder,
inspection.
the builder or the subcontractors would be responsible for?
The builder is responsible, but guess what? If he's a good builder and his subcontractor
Right.
messed it up, he's getting his subcontractor back out there to fix it, or a different one who does a better job. I spoke to the builder, and he said, yeah, here's the issue. We were using a different contractor back then. He has since been fired. We don't use him anymore for that reason. The same house, it had some siding issues. So get this, you had the subject home here, the neighbor's home here. Sun would hit the window of the neighbor's home and then hit the siding of the subject home. It just warped the crap out of it. Right, and so the builder came in and replaced the siding, and I think they put some sort of film or something over the other window, so. Long story short, always encourage an inspection, it's up to them, but when in doubt, it's worth it. I helped somebody buy a spec home, we had an inspector come through and he caught a few things. No home is perfect, even brand new properties, right? Okay, have you ever been, have you ever walked through a new construction home site before? Are they the cleanest? No, it's nuts sometimes. Like you'd be crazy. It's crazy what you see sometimes. So just having that inspection sometimes is a good thing. Okay.
Even through our house during construction. Last year I replaced our carpet with hardwood floor.
Okay.
And I came home to the biggest mess ever. And the guy that did the floor wouldn't tell me. He called his wife and said, hey, will you let Megan know? And she's like, we eat chicken. Like, he wouldn't call me and tell me, but they evidently must have used our living room as where they mixed all the mud and everything, and then they never scraped it all up from the subfloor before they put down the pad and everything. So Monty was telling me that, he said, not only did they not scrape it up, but he said then when they tried to staple down the pad, he said they just put like 50 staples in one spot, like instead of just scraping it up. So when they scraped it all up, I had dust everywhere, like it was awful.
It's building a home is not a clean process, and sometimes they don't always clean it the way you would think of the way you would like. If the builder doesn't clean the vents prior to closing, I highly suggest that the clients do that afterward, because and this is what frustrates me sometimes is sometimes those vents, they get used as like the little like they're purposely kicking. Like I was walking through well with a client one time, and there's a 5-hour energy bottle. Had to reach in and dig out of there. It would have just been in there, right? Like that's not cool. Anyway, that's beside the point. Get me fired up. So whether or not it's contingent upon the sale of the buyer's property, keep in mind the added piece of communication that we just discussed about what you can share with clients that might be on the fence about selling. Hey, sell contingent upon you finding the next home that you're going to move into. That's like a silver bullet to that objection. right? And they don't have to accept anything if the buyer is not willing to, adhere to that contingency. So it affords them the opportunity to see if it's even an option. Taxes, yep, we're familiar with that. Really no changes here. Additional provisions, yep. Title, yep, we're familiar with all that stuff. This is all pretty much the same once we're beyond this point. Let me ask you about this portion right here when it asks about agency and dual agency representation. So if I check line 405 that dual agency does not apply, do people still sign lines 420 to 422? Sign it.
DocuSign makes them.
You can delete it.
So let me ask you this. Let's say we're sitting across the table, we got hard copy and pen. If it's not a dual agency transaction, once I check line 405, our signature is required at that point? No, absolutely not, right? Once I check line 405 and say it does not apply, everything else below that's no longer relevant.
It says skip to line whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because it does say before designing, it says you authorize and instruct broker and salesperson to act as dual agents.
Right. So you
they
would
shouldn't
you would
sign it.
only sign if line 406, if the box at 406 is checked, then you're signing
Right.
saying yes, we agree
Otherwise
to
they
dual
shouldn't
agency.
sign
Yep. So what I normally do is I'll check line 405 and I'll put a big X to the remainder, right? Even though I can tell it's bugging the crap out of me that I write big X's on the PA. The other stuff is pretty. Huh?
See, I agree. The problem with I used to do things on my PA too, and then the broker said, no, you can't do that. And
Sure.
you shouldn't even put red X's or X's next to where they're supposed to sign, because it could be construed as leading. So that's just, I don't know what Megan's thinking, but that's what I'm
I hear
thinking.
you. I hear you. You do what you need to do. Here's what I don't like. I don't like any blanks on that PA because that means somebody can go back and put something in there. If there's a big X through it, you can't do that.
I've never had anybody who doesn't want to leave.
There you go.
They
Well,
won't
but
sign
again,
it.
but Renee, this is
It's
specific
not a
to
purchase
this.
agreement.
1 second. This is specific to this transaction, saying whether or not it is dual agency, not whether or not they're just open to it.
Oh.
Yeah, that's the distinction.
Oh, it does not apply in this transaction.
This is an other portion. So if you want to, if your client is using conventional financing and you didn't have room earlier in the PA by the financing terms, if you wanted to add in a conventional financing escape clause, you could do it here. And then below, you're just checking the box of any other addendums that would potentially go with this purchase agreement. So in addition to the purchase agreement, when we're doing a transaction, if our financing addendum, our closing costs, and our inspection contingency addendum are all now included in the PA, what other documents, well, let me ask you this, what other document is still usually required, even though they don't have to agree to it?
Arbitration.
Arbitration, right? So that could be all that you need for some deals. Is this an arbitration, right? What if you have others where there might be a levy? Earnest money receipt, absolutely. Other addendums that you might use potentially fairly regularly are lead-based paint, well and septic, things of those nature, right? Some of these other ones you might not get into as often, but those are the two others you might use as regularly.
You still do that earnest money receipt, but it's a trust fund.
Yeah, because you didn't receive it as a receipt.
No, so you would.
Good question.
Email you a receipt.
Right, that's what I thought. I was getting confused.
Any other questions? When they sign line, okay, so lines 514 and 515, should those be left blank?
No.
And when they sign there, what are they indicating or? Right, are they agreeing to arbitration? No. Are they saying that arbitration is a part of this purchase agreement? No. So is arbitration part of the purchase agreement? No, it's absolutely not. That's sometimes why it gets confusing. We think it's an addendum. We're not adding to the PA. Arbitration is completely separate, saying if there is a dispute, this is or isn't the process that you maybe want to utilize, right? So they just sign here saying that you've gone over that form with them, and they can choose whether or not they want to sign off on that form. That's bless you. That's the only form. Arbitration is the only form I don't X and circle next to where they're supposed to sign because I don't want to be accused of leading them to sign that one. Bless you. And if they decline, I line through it, I write decline, and I have them initial next to it. Any other questions? So here's the other caveat to this. there's a good chance that at some point, especially in the near future, whether you are submitting a purchase agreement or you have a listing and an agent is submitting a purchase agreement on your listing, they might not submit on the right new form, right? Or they might be a little messed up, or maybe they missed a couple of things, or they're just not, for whatever reason, they're not yet on the same page. And so what I would ask of you is to be the better agent, right? If they give you an outdated form, you can very nicely, professionally say, hey, thank you so much, I received the offer. Just to let you know, there's a new version of the purchase agreement that's now out in effect. I really need the terms put on that purchase agreement. If you have questions about that, let me know. If you need a copy, let me know. But you should be able to go into Flex and pull the new version of the purchase agreement. I need the offer on that, right? And if you even need to help them or take them and kind of show them, that's fine. But you know, be the professional ones that are kind of saying, hey, this is the way it needs to be. If you need to, make me or Bruce the bad guy. My broker requires, my office manager requires that everything now be on the new form because this is the one that's out. So do yourself a favor and do them a favor, because you're going to find that some people aren't necessarily aware of it yet, right? And it needs to be on the new form.
Well, there's top agents in Rochester that's butcher purchase agreements, scratching, initialing, all over. You have the right to send them back too.
I do.
But they are legal, is what I.
Absolutely.
They're legal.
Absolutely. So here's, if you're the seller and your seller is ultimately accepting the legal document, well, they can determine what they're comfortable accepting or signing off on, right? But I'd be lying to you if I didn't say, you know, obviously I don't do it as much anymore. Carly does, and her handwriting is much nicer than mine. But I'd be lying to you if I didn't say I haven't scratched things out or had people initial or written things on a purchase agreement. And it's a legal binding document, and it's a legal breathing document. You can make changes to it. You can add language to it that even counteracts the language that's already in it. That's what I add language regarding the inspection every time that is exact opposite of what it says, right? But if it comes out of, if it's disordered or it's really goofy and discombobulated, I think you can very professionally say, hey, I received the offer, I appreciate it. You know, my sellers aren't comfortable with some of the changes that have been made on there. If we can figure out a way to do it in a way that's more legible, more organized, maybe we use an actual addendum to add some of the things you're looking to change on there. Don't be bashful about pushing back on some of that stuff and asking those questions. And if a change occurs, is just one party initially next to it good enough? No, it has to be both. They can make a change and somebody can initial next to it all day long and send it back to the seller, but until the seller also initials next to it and does what? Sends it back, it's not valid or fully executed, right?
So why, I'm just asking, if you're gonna make changes, wwhy don't you just do an addendum? Why would you rather scratch it out?
Because sometimes it might be, so an addendum because I'm lazy, all right? Because I'm lazy, or
You don't want to retag
yeah,
line,
or
blah,
maybe
blah, blah.
maybe I don't want another form. Like sometimes it can be as simple as this: the inspection timeline says 10, you cross out, we make it 7, everybody initials next to it.
Okay.
You know what I mean? If it's that simple, I would rather do that. Okay, but if it's more of a major change, or if it's a collection of changes, then I might take it over to an actual amendment. Great question.
And here's another one for you.
Or I might rewrite the PA.
Just rewrite that page and insert it. No.
Well, this same
Pretty
agent
soon we're gonna have
that
to initial on
challenged,
your page.
yeah,
Yeah.
the same agent that challenged me on the date thing also sent me an addendum. And I don't want to sound like that agent, the know-it-all agent. I know it should be an amendment. What if I don't have her redo it? What is, you know, I know it needs to be an amendment. I'm not going to tell
I
her
think you're
to.
fine. I think you're fine.
People do it wrong all the
I
time.
mean, it's not that hard.
I know.
If you write a piece of paper
Shockingly
after
hard
final
for some
acceptance date, you gotta have an amendment. Why is that so hard for people to understand?
Yeah, I hear you. We could spend all day talking about
See,
that.
and I think of what it is I look at it as, I mean, I've been in for 13 years now, and it's more of awareness, learning on your part. I mean, I look at it as you're aware, you know, in whatever business you're gonna be in, whatever job you're gonna be in, there's always gonna be people that do it differently and do it wrong. And it kind of goes back.
If they're doing it differently, for me, they're doing it wrong.
Right. Well, it is wrong.
It is,
And me with OCD, you know, it's like,
right,
Yeah.
but I mean,
Well, I'll be honest with you, I for the longest time thought that I understood it 110% clearly, then I realized, oh, I'm not. So I was like, okay, no, if we're changing the terms of the contract, or if we're changing anything, that's clearly an amendment, but if we're just adding something to it, that's an addendum. Well, no, it's during the initial offer, everything that's added, all the different addendums, those are addendums. Even if you're adding something to it after the fact, it still needs to be an amendment. Even if it doesn't necessarily change the terms, it still needs to be an amendment, right? But the important thing is, whether it's an addendum or an amendment, is that you're documenting it and it's being signed off by both parties. That's really the most important thing.
well, that's what I was wondering. I mean, if push comes to shove, because it's an addendum and it should have been an amendment, you know, what could happen?
Right. It would be a weak argument to say this should have been put on an addendum versus an amendment. But if you've got a statement and both parties have agreed and signed to it, I think it's hard to argue that. Yeah. Good point of discussion. All right, so one other thing I'd like to talk about are referrals and how they take place within our office and how we go about them, okay? So we do have an actual referral form. If you're sending out a referral, I highly recommend and encourage you to use this form. It outlines who you're referring to, what the agreed referral percentage is, contact information of the client, etc. Because if you're anything like me, how many of you have maybe before just called, emailed, or texted somebody a referral? And then how many of you never actually followed up with this form? That's fine. But here's what I'll tell you. If you refer a client to somebody, sometimes it can take a long time for that thing to actually close, right? And do you think whether or not it's maliciously intended or it's just being a human being, do you think sometimes people forget about that? Oh my gosh, that person was referred to me like over a year ago, completely forgot that Michelle's the one that put me in touch with them, and I just closed it and never sent a referral fee.
That ends in a year.
yeah, I was gonna say, how long is that?
12 months unless you change the.
Yeah, everything's
Okay.
changeable. Yeah, everything's changeable.
But I mean, sometimes I get them, send them, and
Right.
then if I put them in my contact 2 years later, all of
Right.
a sudden they buy, is
Right.
it still?
So
a referral?
here's what I'll say. When we're sending a referral, once it's sent, we could just throw our hands up and hope for the best, or we could accept some responsibility. And I think it's in your best interest to, you send the referral form, and then you check in every so often, right? Do yourself that favor, put it on a tracker somewhere and check in with the agent every, hey, how's it going? Just checking in to see it, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, you might start to annoy them, but that's fine. Do it every, once a month or whatever. That's pretty easy to do, right?
So if it's over a
And
year, would you just redo it?
Say again?
If it's over a year, would you redo the form?
I wouldn't give it an end date. I would say until they purchase
Oh, you can write that.
or until they sell. That's what I would do.
There is an actual end date on
Not, I mean,
There is no.
There is
Yeah,
there
something that
is.
says 12.
this agreement is to remain valid for the term of 12 months
Oh.
or blank from the date of this agreement. Life.
it. Till death do us part.
Okay,
Right,
so right
yeah.
until.
See,
Um,
that's what I mean, a year seems.
Well, let me
appropriate,
ask you
put
this.
someone on your trick on it.
Have you ever referred to an agent that you didn't really know before? Absolutely. How do you know if that person is shiesty or not? You really don't. Now, I know this isn't a secret, we like the general public to know, but are there shiesty realtors out there? Sure there are. Absolutely. We got two in this room? No, just kidding.
Speak for yourself.
But if push comes to shove and you sent a referral, God forbid it was over the phone, and this form does not exist to prove otherwise, and the agent refuses to pay the referral, what do you think is going to happen? You're not going to get paid more than likely. A couple years ago, Greg Hartos, a guy that I love, he's an awesome guy, been involved with the association for many years. He's now acts as a broker compliance guy for a few different Keller Williams offices in the cities. He once had an agent that sent a referral out to California. We're talking, a few million. So a referral fee on something like that is a big deal. They refused to pay the referral fee. They fought it. Greg flew himself out to California with the agent to go before some sort of hearing, whatever process they use in California. They were awarded the referral fee, thankfully. But you have to do yourself the due diligence to make sure that you're sending this form out and getting it back signed. Sometimes this gets sent, we forget about it. Oh, I did what I had to do, I sent it, bring it back, right? A couple other things. when you're sending a referral, really, you should be trying to tee that thing up as much as possible, right? If somebody registers on my website, I'll use myself as an example. I've got a website. If somebody registers, pings and says they're looking for a house in Rochester, and I just copy and paste that and forward it to, let's say I forward it to Tamara. Say, hey Tamara, I'd like to refer this person to you, and I want a referral fee. I could do that. That's legit. But do I really deserve a referral at that point? Yeah, I mean, you certainly could get one. You certainly could get one. You absolutely could. But I think in order to really earn that sucker, try to call or tee it up, right? I'm not saying that you have to, because sometimes you can't. You might call, you don't get a hold of them, and you might still send it to Tamara, right? But do what you can to tee up that client for the person you're referring to, right?
Send them the agency relations form, so you know that you met with them. Send them any information that you have on.
Yeah, if you did meet with them, absolutely. But do this and have a conversation with the agent you're referring to, and make sure there's some. We had an agent who did everything right, everything they should have done. They did exactly everything they should have, could have, would have done. But my opinion is this: when you're the referring agent, if I refer something to Renee, I have now said, Renee, you've got my blessing. Do what you need to do. I trust your judgment on this deal. Right? I don't get to armchair quarterback the deal after the fact if I'm unhappy with how much I end up getting in the referral. The percentage is the percentage, right? But if something happened during negotiations or whatever, it's on Renee. I don't get to second guess that. As long as I get my 25 or 30% of whatever she got, I'm good, right? But do yourself a favor and stay in communication with that referring agent. Let them know, hey, good news. I met them. We went out and looked at properties. Exciting. When we go under contract or make an offer, I'll let you know. 2 weeks later, hey Renee, good news. We put an offer on a home. It's been accepted. We're projecting to close this day and time, right? Just keeping them in the loop. Because let me ask you this. Let's say I refer a listing to Renee. She takes that listing. It's just a crazy, crazy listing, right? It's one of those listings that, man, I don't even know if we need to put this on the MLS or show people, or maybe a buyer comes about, or maybe let's say it's a variable rate comp, right? That listing commission goes down, right? Well, then you refer it back to the agent. They're like, well, wait a minute. This is less than I thought. Well, I had to do a variable rate comp. Well, what do you mean? What is that? No, she gets to make those decisions and that choice, right? And you just refer it out. But keep them informed, because that certainly helps. And there's a reason I'm going over that, right? Just for our collective knowledge.
Is that in what's in the
This form?
Keller Williams
It
form?
absolutely is.
Okay.
Yep, and if you need a copy too, you can email Kate, because that's what I said.
I have a question on the
Yes,
variable
ma'am.
rate. If you do,
Oh my goodness, variable rate questions? I don't know if I'm ready for this.
So if you're listing and you say 6%, but you say, well, 5.5% if we, if we do the list until we bring the buyer. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not different if someone else from Keller Williams does. Is that variable rate or not? If it's just the list, it's still variable.
Because if you could bring the purchase agreement,
it could be different.
So let me say what a variable rate comp is, and then I answer your question. Variable rate compensation is this: if Jim is the seller, and I'm his listing agent, and I tell Jim, here's the deal, I'm gonna list you at 6, but if I also bring the buyer, it's gonna go down to 5. That's a variable rate comp. But let's say you and I, Renee, we're at the same office. I represent him as a seller. You represent the buyer. Well, it's not variable rate.
Not if you didn't say it.
Correct, because you rep the buyer.
Unless you wrote it in that way that Keller Williams, but you wouldn't.
Yeah. And you can agree to variable rate. You can agree to variable rate after the initial listing contract as well. If it's a multiple offer situation and somebody calls and asks you, is one of the offers yours? You got to say yes. If they ask you, do you have a variable rate comp, and you do, you have to say yes. If they ask you how much it is, you don't have to say that.
Okay, and then what if you
but
said
you have to still put that in MLS. Where it says dual/variable rate, if you have that agreement.
If you have it initially, it should be on there. But do people agree to it sometimes after it's listed? Absolutely. So it might not be there. So never assume, if it says no, never assume that it doesn't exist, because a lot of times that variable rate comp gets negotiated at the time the seller realizes their agent also represents the buyer.
Put no, because I have no idea what that means.
Absolutely.
So I always put no.
A lot of agents have no idea what that means.
And if you say 6%, but let's see here, 6%, but 5.5% if we sell in the first 30 days. Is that variable rate?
Anytime-
That is to anytime there's.
Well, no. That's not variable rate, because you're telling, because that could be,
Doesn't matter if it's first
Leanne
buyer.
could bring the buyer in that case.
Right? It doesn't matter who brings the buyer, no matter what, within 30 days. That's what you're saying, no matter what, within 30 days.
Yeah,
or
but
is
it's
that
not
what
gonna
you're saying?
change what the buyer's rate is, it's just gonna change
If you
ours.
say to the
But it-
buyer,
but
the
it's
seller
also-
would
It's always
take
gonna be
it.
3%.
But it's
I would
also not
say.
gonna change for the seller. If it's within 30 days, it doesn't matter which agent brings that offer, correct? The seller's only gonna pay
Right.
5.5%,
Because
so then
we
it's
would
not a
take
variable.
2.5, yeah.
Right.
So then it's
What
not-
I would do in that case is I would just write it in the listing agreement where it has other, just say within the first 30 days, if it goes under contract, commission to be reduced to blank.
Right,
Yep, and then
But that's not
I
variable
wouldn't
rate,
list it as a variable rate
You
comp.
still pay out 3% to the other agent.
And the seller.
We-
is
let's
gonna net
take
the
that
same
one
amount
offline,
no
'cause we're
matter
getting
who
close to
brings
being done.
okay.
So if you're in a multiple offer situation, which is usually when that variable rate, that's when this applies as a multiple offer situation. It doesn't matter if you have the buyer, if Jim has the buyer, if someone from Edina has the buyer, it doesn't matter in that multiple offer situation. The seller's gonna net the same, they're gonna pay the same
In
commission.
the first 30 days.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
That's
So that's where it's not variable, because it doesn't matter who's presenting the offer.
Good question. If you have more, let's follow up on it afterward. So one last thing I want to run past you guys. So I'm creating, so something we have in the Twin Cities, it's this Facebook group. It's called Minnesota Real Estate Buyer and Seller Needs. And agents, regardless of what company, are all allowed to be and encouraged to be a part of this. And it's really just a way for us to advertise or network pre-listings, new listings, and buyer needs. For example, if you've got a buyer right now that's looking for a Rambler, 175 or below, 3-bed, 2-bath in Rochester, you network it in our office, well, that's good, but it's not as good as networking it with all agents in Rochester, right? So I'm building something, I think we're just gonna call it Southeast Minnesota, pre-lists, new lists, and buyer needs. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start adding people from our office to it, but I'm gonna ask you not to add people outside our office yet. I wanna add you to it, and I want you to start posting pre-lists, new listings, and buyer needs in the groups, so that by the time we start adding people outside the company, there's already got some valuable information in the news feed, so not just like, what is this, and they don't even bother with it, right? So you'll see that come within this week. I'll start adding folks to it. And then at that point, once we have some good traction going in there, then you are encouraged to invite anybody to it, their agents in our area, and then I'll verify if their agent can approve them. But I think this would be a good networking site, especially in this market, because we've sold and helped buyers get properties under contract with agents outside of our company through networking pre-lists and networking buyer needs. So I
call it Southeast, is there?
Southeast Minnesota.
Yeah,
Open to
or
suggestion.
whatever.
Yep. But then that way we can get a good, we can start getting some good collaboration amongst all the companies in Southeast Minnesota when it comes to stuff like this.
You have this one's Minnesota, there's also a Twin Cities.
Yeah, there's two. Minnesota it's really the Twin Cities, unfortunately, but there is a Twin Cities one too, but this one's also basically the same thing because the people that are doing it are also in the Twin Cities. For the most part.
Is this site active right now?
Absolutely.
What is it?
Oh, ours?
Yeah. this one.
I've created it. It's just not all the way done, and I haven't started inviting people to it yet. Oh, come on now.
But this is not for the general public, you're only gonna be.
This is for agents. Right, so this is what it will be. Southeast Minnesota pre-list, new list, and buyer needs.
Blocks.
What's it? Negative. But I think it's a good way for us to start interacting and collaborating and showing people that that's what we need to interact and collaborate. And we can probably sell more by working together
Will
regardless of.
lenders be allowed to be?
Probably not, unless you can make a good case as to why you think they should be, but I'd like to just keep it at agents. What I don't want this to become is an advertising site. I really want it to just be strictly pre-lists, new listings, and buyer needs, right? Or maybe even if you do a dramatic price reduction, you want to spit it out to everybody quickly. That might be a way to do it.
We're not gonna get dinged from MLS or anything, right?
Just you, Leanne. If anybody has to take the fall for it, if anybody has to take the fall for
Because
it.
it's not a public site, it's
Okay,
just
So
for
we don't have to do that
agents.
pre-listing form with the,
Say that again.
with the sellers. There's a form that if you're going to advertise before it's on MLS.
So if you just
You
have
don't have to
if
do
you've
that.
got a
You
property
put it
that's
on here.
coming on the market, you can just say, hey, anybody, have a buyer looking for this? I'm talking with so-and-so, or I've got this thing maybe coming on the market soon that might be a good fit for them. It's good old-fashioned agent networking. Any other questions? Again, just look for more information on that in the future. And that's all I've got for you guys. We'll take like a 10, 15-minute break. Then we'll meet right back in here for the ALC.
On those pre-lists, you wouldn't do specifics though on there.
No, it would just, I mean, it would be.
Just say, I have this, whatever, or contact me if you want more information.
Absolutely. I would, if you have some pictures, by all